Like you can teach anyone to chop an onion. I can teach anyone to plan a calendar, but I can't teach anyone how to interact and get to know someone. That has to come from within. It's a want within yourself to connect on that human level.
Tips from Trestle is brought to you by eMenu Choice Point of Sale, Wizox AI, and Clark Pro. Welcome to Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality Podcast. This podcast explores the senior living industry with a unique focus on food, hospitality, and the community experience. I'm your host, Aaron Fish. My goal for this podcast: educate, inform, and inspire leaders in senior living. How? By bringing the resident and customer experience to the front of mind in our industry. We should bring the passionate spirit of food and hospitality to everything that we do and everyone we serve each and every day. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. Today on Tips from Trestle, I'm chatting with Heather Burns. Heather is a senior living resident engagement professional with over 20 years of experience. She has held leadership roles at both for-profit and not-for-profit operators, including time with Brookdale Senior Living in Alabama, Sunrise Senior Living in Oklahoma, and Baptist Community Services in Texas. In her various roles, Heather has developed innovative programs that enrich the lives of residents across independent living, assisted living, and memory care neighborhoods. Heather is known for fostering meaningful connections among residents, families, and staff through her engagement programming efforts, bringing creativity, compassion, and expertise to every community she's served. Heather, thanks for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
Hi, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I am looking forward to our conversation. To all transparency, part of the reason we're talking is, one, resident engagement is a huge piece of any senior living community. But as this podcast is coming out, start of March, we'll be working together. You're going to be working with Trestle as the corporate director of resident engagement, and I'm very excited for that. But I wanted to talk about your philosophy, your approach to what resident engagement should look like, because it really is what kind of drew me to working with you in this. I think there's a lot of really good things that you bring to resident engagement. And so let's talk a little bit about resident first philosophy and why it's critical in senior living in general.
It is. I mean, without a resident, we don't have a job. So the resident comes first. And I break it down to everybody in that simple terms. We're there working for them in their home. And if everything we do serves that resident, then it's going to come together and it's going to work, and we're going to have a great environment, a great atmosphere, and the residents will thrive and we will thrive as a community. I worked for an amazing woman. Her name was Amika. She was very forward thinking. This was back in early 2000. And we had a schnoozler room. We were an Eden alternative home. We used the Montessori method. And she really opened my eyes to what we can do for residents when we put them first and when we embrace them for who they are. It's not about us, it's about them. And going into their world, into their environment, and making it about them, putting them first, really does change them and us and how we work together.
So resident first, you're talking about resident centered, we talk about resident centered dining approach, resident centered care. A lot of operators talking this language, right? So this isn't anything that's going to, I'm sure, shock our listeners. But in working with you around resident engagement and kind of how to build a resident engagement program, you did kind of teach me about some deeper philosophies that you have taken to heart, that you use to kind of support how you approach resident engagement. And so what I'd love for you to do is maybe educate our listeners a little bit and just kind of tell them about each one of them and why they're so important and how they support a resident engagement program.
Sure. I look at it as like a holistic approach to senior living. We want to focus on the overall well-being of our residents. That does not just include their physical well-being. It's their physical health and their emotional health, their mental well-being, their spiritual well-being. And that can encompass a lot of different things. It's not just going to church or doing a yoga class. And this all goes back to early 2000 when I started working at the Eden Home. I was hired as a vet tech because this house, this home, this community, we had dogs, we had cats, we had a gazillion birds, we had a rabbit. My job was to care for these animals, to nurture these
Yeah.
animals. Well, what I discovered working in this Eden home was that interactions with living things give you a purpose to get up in the morning. Focusing on these, our residents as a whole, gives them meaning and purpose every day. So you look at having pets, having a garden. The Montessori method is another one of my favorite things. My daughter went to a Montessori at 2 years old. She was pouring her own cereal. I couldn't understand a word coming out of her mouth, but she could teach me what she wanted to do because she could show me and she could do it. This Montessori method takes everyday activities and gives our residents a sense of belonging, a sense of independence, a sense to be able to do things that they used to do in their everyday life that sometimes they can no longer manage. But with incorporating these Montessori methods, we give them adaptive materials, adaptive tools. You've seen this in the dining experience, an adaptive plate or fork that makes them successful where before they might not have felt successful. They were embarrassed. They didn't want to come out. We give them those tools to live life to the fullest. Another one I love is, have you ever heard of snoozling? It's
Not until you told me about it while we were developing all of this stuff.
it's fascinating. It's a multi-sensory environment. It was created back in the 70s in the Netherlands. But where I worked, we had a snoozling room. It was fiber optics. It was bubble tubes, a massage chair. We had soft music playing, warm towels, blankets with tactile like tassels and that soft, minky velvet material.
Yeah.
And that multi-sensory environment is there to create a calming and enjoyable environment, a relaxing environment. It helps decompress, relieves anxiety and agitation. And the best part is, it's not just for residents. If you're having a bad day as a staff member, you can go into that snoozling room and it helps take all that exterior stimulation and just let it go. And you can breathe again. And our residents need that. And these three methods, highly firm believer in. And I can't talk enough about how amazing they are and how you have to have this in your community and use these to learn and teach and incorporate into your everyday life.
Yeah, they're so fascinating to me. And I also have some experience with Montessori with my two boys being in a Montessori really, really young. But it just fascinates me that as a novice around resident engagement, like knowing just enough to be dangerous, right? Like learning about all of this, that there's a lot more thought and a lot more like theory and a lot more like development behind why some of the things are done and why they're necessary. It's just fascinating to me. And I think it drives home for me why it's so important and why as an industry we need to focus on it more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that for me is it's a little bit different frame of mind from say like being a dining or a culinary professional in senior living versus a resident engagement professional. You know, one of the things I always kind of think about is the dining room in a senior living community is a restaurant, right? We can't make every single meal you want. We've got to follow a menu. We want to do table side service. So it's more, we're serving you in a restaurant environment, which isn't necessarily the same as it is with resident engagement, right? Because you really truly have to treat it as more like the resident's home, right? And so I'd love for you to kind of talk a little bit about why that is important and kind of why there's a different way of thinking than maybe the culinary professional would have in a senior living community.
Well, for me, resident engagement isn't just about keeping our resident busy. It's not just about activities. We're not just playing bingo. We're not just gardening. We're meeting these residents' needs and we're meeting their wants. So we're meeting their social need, their physical need, but we're also meeting that want in them to engage in a meaningful activity, to form a bond with other residents. They've moved into this assisted living home and they need to form friendships and really feel like they have a place that they belong. And that's what we're there for, is to give them that.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And like we've talked about in the past, if they're not in the dining room or if they're not getting some sort of care service, what are they doing with the rest of their day? Right. And so, like you
Yeah.
said, it's not just like attending bingo, but it's like, how do we help them engage throughout the day and throughout the week around those kind of planned other services? And so, one of the other things that leads me to think about is how resident engagement might be able to serve as a bridge between departments. I think about like, marketing moves them in, and then like dining is like making sure they get meals, and housekeeping is making sure that their apartments are clean. But when you really think about like all of those different departments, they can, and I've seen it happen where they get really siloed. And thinking about resident engagement being, how do I fill in between those various things? How, from your vantage point, do you see resident engagement serving as that bridge between departments?
Technology continues to drive changes in senior care, and that includes food service. eMenu Choice is an award-winning point-of-service application for managing the dining function in senior living communities. This mobile, touchscreen-enabled software enhances the dining experience for residents while streamlining processes for staff. The flexibility and functionality of eMenu Choice makes it an effective solution for any type of senior living environment, from independent and assisted living to skilled nursing facilities. It works for production kitchens or restaurant-style service with options for per meal or a la carte pricing, and accommodates a variety of payments, including bill to account, meal credits, and credit cards. Created by a senior care provider with more than a century of experience serving older adults, eMenu Choice eliminates communication barriers between staff and residents while enabling person-centered choices and greater resident satisfaction. eMenu Choice, transforming dining for senior living.
Well, I've always felt that my role in the resident engagement department is to bring all the departments together. I look at it like a bridge or maybe a bicycle wheel, and you've got resident engagement in the middle and then all the spokes of the different departments. And we can bring those departments together for the betterment of the resident. And if we all work together with that resident first philosophy, it's the teamwork, the camaraderie, the friendships that evolve are going to happen naturally. And that's one of the most important things as in working in a community, is not just working for the resident, but working together as a team for that resident. I want different departments to come to activities and participate. I'm not asking to lead. I'm not asking them to be in charge. I'm asking them to sit down with the residents and engage in a meaningful activity, even if it's playing bingo or a resident has a birthday and their families bring a cake. I want to make sure that each department is included and that they're brought into the fun department so they can sit back, take a breath from their everyday activities and get to know these residents on a different level. It's so much more meaningful when you know them.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know that when I was working with the various management companies, that one of the things I always did in developing the food programs for the companies was there had to be an engagement component, right? It wasn't just like a lot of operators have like a cooking class or a cooking demonstration, right? But like, is it more, right? Like, what do you do? How do you engage that? And what I found was when those chefs, when those dining directors, when those culinary directors would start to engage, they would start to make those connections. And then lo and behold, complaints in the dining room would go down, and they would be able to go out and they wouldn't be afraid of walking the dining room because the residents knew them. The residents knew where they were at. And if there wasn't a problem or a concern, it wasn't a straight negative approach from the resident. It was more of a, hey, by the way, this happened today. Not a whole lot you can do about it in the moment, but let's try to make it not happen again. And the chefs were able to really be better at what they did by making that connection. And I think you're right on about that connection being there. So one of the other things that I think is really important is training, right? Ongoing training for food service is important, right? Around food safety, sanitation. But when you think about a resident first engagement philosophy, how does training really become a part of that role for an activities or an engagement director?
Think training starts with orientation. This is one of my favorite components of working in a community is training. I was given the job of orientation at one of my last communities because I do embrace it and feel like it's so important. And I see the training as an opportunity for the directors in all departments to come together to talk to the employees and to get to know them. Because if you don't take the time as a director to train your employees and how you want something done, they're going to do it how they think it needs to be done or how they think it should be done. And then you can't get mad at the employee when it's not what you want because you didn't train them. You didn't sit down with them and explain to them what you want or how it should be done. There's so much training out there, and I still go through training. I fail on a daily basis. In what I do, you can
And I,
never have too much training. And I feel like leading by example is one of the best training tools a director can have, or anyone. It doesn't have to be a director. It can be any staff member.
yeah. One of the things that we've talked about in some of our other conversations as we've gotten to this recording was the difference between the soft skills and technical skills. And you had talked a little bit about empathy and patience and compassion. And obviously, from my standpoint, a resident engagement director or activity director probably is more suited at those skills than maybe a chef might be. And so I'd love for you to talk about how training around those soft skills brings value, not just to resident engagement, but to the entire community.
Yeah, when you hire someone, the first thing you get is a resume. You look at someone on a piece of paper. Well, their resume might look fantastic, but you have to look deeper. You have to see that human side. Are they patient? Are they kind? Are they caring? Are they empathetic? They need the proper skills. Yes, they have to have those skills to perform their job, but they need this character and this humanity underneath. And I think that's more important than actually having those skills to, chop an onion or to put together an activity calendar. Yes, that's important, but it's how they interact on a day-to-day basis and how we connect. You know, not all of us are going to get along. There's always going to be a personality conflict here and there. How do you overcome that? How do you communicate and work through it? How do you move on from that? That to me is what makes great employees, are those employees that have the heart, have the empathy, and want to connect with our residents, who want to take the time to sit down and get to know them. Like, you can teach anyone to chop an onion. I can teach anyone to plan a calendar, but I can't teach anyone how to interact and get to know someone. That has to come from within. It's a want within yourself to connect on that human level.
Yeah, that goes back to that philosophy that I've had of you can train anybody on a technical skill, but they've got to have the right mindset and temperament to work in your community. And so it's a great segue into talking a little bit about inter-staff relationships and why having those be really strong and really well developed and what's important. And you had a few reasons why it's crucial. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about some of those with our listeners.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most intricate and difficult things to tackle when you're working in a community is that staff-staff relationship. Again, if you don't have teamwork and you don't have camaraderie, you're not going to have a successful business. You have to want to work as a team. So I look at it like I'm never going to ask a staff member to do something that's not in their job duties. But what I am going to do is I'm going to lead by example, and I'm always going to offer to help. If they're short-staffed, what can I do? Heather, will you pull trash today? Of course. Heather, we're short-staffed. Can you keep the residents in activities so we have a chance to get this done? Of course. I am on your team, and what you need me to do, I'm going to do. And in return, those relationships evolve, and they see me willing to help them and work as a team player. And guess what? They want to help me. So when I have an off day or I have an employee that doesn't show up, they step right in. They have no problem crossing over that barrier of department to work with me. But it's because I took the time to get to know them. And I'm not saying go to a family barbecue. I'm not saying, go to their baby shower. I'm saying get to know them at work as a person. Sit
Mm,
down and eat lunch with them. Again, ask them to come to an activity for food. Don't ask them to come to activity to help. You want them to want to be around you and want to help you because you help them in return. It's a give and take. And again, that teamwork makes the dream work.
yeah. No, for sure. And I think about the impact that that can have on things like resident care, employee satisfaction. One of the things, we've been working on a few projects where we're doing courses and doing some training, and problem solving and communication with your team is critical. And I have to think that this engagement improves that, right? Like the more engaged, the more you're willing to work across those department silos, the better you're going to be as a community team at problem solving and communicating.
Yep. Because you've developed that friendship, that respect. You have that comfortability with the person. I mean, I'm comfortable going into any department and saying, oh my gosh, especially dining. I completely forgot we have an ice cream social. The chefs, the servers, they are more than willing to be like, Heather, we got you. We got you.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how much that takes a relief off my shoulders to work with staff that are there for you. Or on the flip side, those staff getting to know the residents with me in my department. I mean, I think that's one of the hardest things when you work as a team and you get to know each other and you get to know your residents is separating that the work-life balance, the work from the emotional side, because working with human is going to become emotional. You make connections. When a resident's health fail, you see your employees hurting and you want to support them and be there for them because you're all on that same team and you're all feeling that.
So one of the things I'm curious to get your thoughts on is thinking about a resident engagement director, an activities director specifically. How can they better encourage this culture of collaboration and supporting each other across all the various different departments?
They have to want to. Have You have to want to get to know your people. It doesn't matter if you have a college degree or if it doesn't matter if you're a housekeeper. We're all the same. We're all there for one reason, and that's to put the resident first. Again, no resident, no job. We're all there to work together to make these resident lives better. And if we can focus on that and realize that's the reason we're all there, it's going to come together because we want the same thing. I see you in the middle of that wheel because typically we're more outgoing people. We've been in position all of our life, engaging or leading something because that's our personality. And so
Yeah.
if you can take that personality trait that you have, you'll bring those introverts out from here and you'll bring those workaholics out from over here by being yourself. But you have to want to.
Yeah. And I think you've listed throughout this entire conversation some other things like the leading by example and engaging with staff to participate in activities. Again, with the shared goal of providing that elevated resident care, elevating resident satisfaction, and really letting them feel the kind of mutual respect for anybody and everybody in the community. I love the visual of like the resident engagement director being the center of the wheel, and they have the spokes out to all the different departments because it just makes sense. That's the hub. They're the center of engagement and center of what residents are looking for day to day. So as we close here, I want to talk a little bit about some of the exciting things that we're doing. I've always worked closely with resident engagement professionals as part of my different roles. But I think it's an area that the industry has talked a lot about. We know that it's an area that needs more support. Usually in a lot of communities, it's a department of one, or if you're lucky, 1.5, right? You maybe get a part-time person to help. So some of the things that we're looking to do with you supporting Trestle in this endeavor is finding those engagement professionals that are left on an island and providing additional support. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about one of the things we're initially going to have is a resident engagement guidebook or manual for those operators. And what are some of the things that you've put in there? I mean, don't sell the farm, obviously, but what are some of the highlights that you think are important as to why that's going to be a critical tool for engagement professionals?
Well, again, I love teaching. I love training. And when you've got someone who feels like they're on an island or who don't have that staff to help them out, sometimes they flounder around. They feel lost. They don't know how to get started. My manual, of course, I've got so much to say, will give them, it's a guidebook and it can help them, jump in, get their feet wet. We can help them with their volunteer program. Volunteers are a necessity. How to reach out to your community, how to reach out to your local schools, how to put together a calendar, how to put together a survey for resident. There's a lot that goes into this. And if you are not a type A or an organized person, it can probably feel really overwhelming. Well, good news, I am. And you can help.
Absolutely.
I've got the checklists that they need. I have everything for them. But mostly, I want to be their friend. I'm here for you because you're there for the resident. And that's my heart. That's where my heart is. It's for those that don't have their own voice anymore. Let's be that voice and let's be there for them.
Yeah. The guidebook, some of the things that I find in reviewing it and working with you on it is it's not just a how-to, right? There's theory, like you mentioned Montessori at the start of the podcast. There's different theories around how to do engagement, and all of that's going to be part of this. So really, it's not just a manual. It is truly a guidebook. Training is another piece that you've talked about in the podcast that I know, we're going to have some train the trainer options available where we can do online or in-person coaching and training support. And I love that one of the things we're going to be doing later in the year is doing a couple of different online courses where not just for engagement directors, but to help them train frontline staff on how to be successful when it comes to resident engagement. And so there's a number of really great initiatives that we've got in the works that are going to be launching throughout the month of March. But we're truly looking at those operators that have that poor lady or that poor gentleman that wants to do their best, but really truly needs a little bit more guidance and support. And that's what we're here for, is to be that for them. So,
right.
Well, Heather, this has been a great conversation. I am super excited to take all of the stuff you talked about today and a lot of the stuff you didn't and start supporting our clients and hopefully other operators with what you do. But let everybody know how they can connect with you to learn more about what you're doing with Trestle and resident engagement and be able to potentially work with you in the future.
Sure. They can find me on LinkedIn, of course, Heather Morgan Burns, or they can send me an email. It's hburn, like the sun burns, at trestlehc.com. And reach out, connect, let's talk.
Perfect. Well, Heather, this has been a great conversation. I'm excited about what we've got in the works for the future. And I think this has been another great episode. So thanks for joining me here on Tips from Trestle.
Thanks so much, Aaron.
So there it is, everybody. Another one in the books. Thanks again for tuning in. Please follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media at Tips from Trestle. You can also learn more about the work I do by following me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. And be sure to check out Trestle Hospitality Concepts at www.trestlehospitalityconcepts.com. I'm your host, Aaron Fish, and this has been another episode of Tips from Trestle.